Good morning, everybody. It's Brian Nemhauser at Hawkblogger, hawkblogger.com. Hope you're all doing well this morning. I actually have my phone back, which makes me happy. And I got a few minutes before I got to run into work to field your questions, talk about what's going on in the world of sports. Interesting watching what's been going on with DeAndre Jordan. Not a Seahawks-specific conversation, but if you missed it, Chris Broussard from ESPN reported this morning, or maybe it was even last night, that Mark Cuban was driving around Texas madly texting people trying to get DeAndre Jordan's address, and Mark Cuban responded this morning pretty aggressively, saying that it was the worst, craziest shit he's ever heard. So fun Twitter times. But as far as NFL stuff goes, interesting to see what's been going on with Jason Pierre-Paul and C.J. Wilson. I mean, to have one player have a finger amputated due to a fireworks accident is just insane. Never heard of that before. Terrible thing to have happen. And then to have two players lose fingers, very weird. I don't know if there's some new kind of firework I'm not familiar with, but pretty amazing for someone like Jason Pierre-Paul, who's going to lose out on a $60 million contract because of a need to shoot a firework off in his hand. Good morning, Terry. So yeah, I think that's this is a franchise level player in Jason Pierre-Paul, who is in his mid-20s still. It seems like he's been around forever, but he's still, a young player. And I'll be interested to see, hands are clearly an important part of the game for any pro athlete. I think that it's right index finger is what's been amputated. So it's pretty important, to be able to control and swim and club linemen to get around people. So, but you also see defensive linemen play with casts on their hands. So I'm not assuming that Jason Pierre-Paul's career is over, but I think it's definitely going to be a situation where people are going to want to know that he can still play before they give him and play at a level worthy of a big contract. So he's definitely lost some money this time around. And speaking of money, daily conversation around Russell Wilson, Doug Farrar, and I'll continue this in a second, but if any of you have questions, please feel free to chime in. I'm happy to take those at any time. And as always, if you tap on your screen, give some hearts, helps people find these Periscope scopes, as they're called, so that helps. As far as money goes, Doug Farrar's doing an article, I think it's coming out today, I don't think it's out yet, I haven't found it, but about Russell Wilson, and I think both about his contract, but about what kind of player he is. And he posted a stat yesterday that Russell Wilson was a 96 rated quarterback in the pocket, and that was as good or on par or better than players like Drew Brees, Andrew Luck, Joe Flacco, and he listed some others. And I think it was a 96 rating, which all that stuff comes from Pro Football Focus. It's not like Doug's actually gone off and done some amazing research. Anyone that has Pro Football Focus can find that stuff. So I'll get back Robo to left guard and center. But in this case, I think that it's not actually all that interesting of a stat. I guess it's getting debated. I think we know Russell Wilson's a highly efficient passer. He always has been. He's a great play-action passer. The passes he's chosen to take on, or that the offensive coordinator's called and that Russell Wilson takes. He's always going to be a low interception guy. He's very conservative. He doesn't throw the ball into danger usually. But Pete Prisco has, reared his head again as being, completely on the opposite end of reason, saying, there's no stat that tells me that any stat that tells me that Russell Wilson's as good of a pocket passer as Drew Brees or Andrew Luck is worthless. And that just comes across as bull. Yes, I think that Russell Wilson is underappreciated as a passer and that he can pass in the pocket. And this idea that he can only pass outside of the pocket and off script is wrong. But to to imply that Russell Wilson is as gifted as a pocket passer as someone like Andrew Luck or Drew Brees, or has to do the things that those quarterbacks do in the pocket, that's also totally wrong. So, as usual, the truth is somewhere in between. I think people that want to just believe that Russell is God and can do everything and is the best quarterback in the NFL, they're going to find reasons to believe that. People that want to say, hey, it's all the Seahawks defense and all the running game and Russell's just a product of that, they're going to find stuff to prove that. I'm a guy that's just in the middle. I mean, I think Russell's an incredibly talented player, perfect fit for the type of offense the Seahawks want, not only because of his skill set, but because of his willingness to play within the offense and not require 35, 40 throws a game. He's not a diva in that way, at least. So I think he's a great fit. I think he's a great addition. I also have my doubts about, how much progress he can make as a pocket passer, as a rhythm passer. I want to see that myself. If he makes that, then I think all these other questions go away, and he does deserve top quarterback money. If he doesn't, then I do have some questions about what kind of longevity a quarterback like him is going to have in the league, and just how much money to dedicate to him. I will get to the left guard and center thing, but just to continue and finish on the Russell Wilson thing, Mitch in the morning on KJR did a good Mr. Salary Cap segment recently. I encourage you to check it out if you haven't already on their podcast on KJR. And Mitch basically went over, can you afford Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner this year? And what his conclusion was, to kind of summarize what was, I think, a 20-minute segment, is if you sign Russell Wilson, there's really little reason to believe that you're going to sign Bobby Wagner. The main reason being is we've got the Percy Harvin contract, the dead money, $7.2 million still on the cap. That's going to make it hard for the Seahawks to both sign Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner this offseason for this year and this salary cap, unless they started dropping and cutting players like Brandon Mebane, like Tony McDaniel, and some other guys. So I don't think it's tenable for the Seahawks to actually cut both Mebane and McDaniel. I think you could maybe do one. From what Mitch's calculations were, and I haven't gone into it in detail, so I'm not going to claim to know for sure, but he even implied that if the Seahawks were to sign Russell Wilson this year, that likely they would have to get rid of at least one of those guys, and maybe Mebane, which I hadn't really thought through. It was a good thought exercise that Mitch went through. I'll have to check it up with Davis, who I always is my go-to guy on cap stuff. But the idea of signing Russell this year and losing Mebane this year is not ideal. I don't think the Seahawks have proved that they've got another nose tackle. Kevin Williams, who took over that spot last year when Mebane was hurt, isn't on the roster. Tava Rubin is here, but based if you've seen the article I wrote on him, hasn't really proven to be a nose tackle and a run stopper. I think he's a better, pocket collapsing kind of defensive tackle. So that's going to be interesting to see. One of the things that was posited is if you sign Bobby Wagner this year, you probably don't have to do a lot of cuts. And that might be the way the Seahawks are going. Try to sign Bobby Wagner. Make sure they have the franchise tag for one. Good morning, Renata. Or Janena. I don't know which one. So I think that the Seahawks don't want to be stuck in a situation where Wagner and Wilson are unsigned. They only have one franchise tag to apply. So, interesting twist. I just thought it was worth bringing up that maybe you're going to have a situation where a player could be signed and players could be cut as a result. So, getting to the question earlier about I think it was left guard and center. I talked about this a little bit maybe a couple days ago, but I still think Alvin Bailey is going to be the left guard. I think he's the odds-on favorite there. He's dropped weight. I think he's already talented. I don't think he's the run blocker that some of the other guys are, but I think he's a better run blocker than maybe some people give him credit for. I think he's a far superior pass blocker to pretty much anyone on the line other than Russell Okung. So I think to have him and Russell Okung right next to each other, that's actually a nice thing. I think that center is interesting. You know, the guy that I brought up a few days ago that I'll be curious to see if he enters the scenario is Mark Glowinski. No one's talked about him yet at center, but I know Tom Cable really likes what he's seen from him and has been trying to find reps. And I don't think he's going to start at right guard with Sweezy, and I don't think he's going to start at left guard with Bailey. And he's incredibly athletic and moves well in space. And it makes me wonder if he could be a guy that could, you know, if you can convert a defensive tackle to a center, then why can't you convert a guard to a center? So I wouldn't be surprised to see Glowinski get some reps and maybe be a surprise name that starts entering the picture at center. I think there was a question that came up about Lofa and what he's going to bring to the linebacker core. You know, I think that Lofa's primary main thing that they want is to bring energy that Ken Norton brought. I mean, that was a really rare and valuable thing, and I think Lofa can bring some of that more in an intense kind of way than a rah-rah kind of way. And thanks for the question about the second cornerback. I'll get to that in a second. I think that the nice thing with Lofa is I actually think he's more of a tactician and a strategist. I think I stuck on that word the other day too. Than Ken Norton was. So I think he can actually be a positive linebacker coach, you know, in a way of like really getting people to think beyond just getting them psyched up to play, but positionally, where are they? How are they setting up? How are they reading the coverage? Reading the blocking schemes. How are they reading the formation? Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. So, yeah, I think that he's going to be potentially a really interesting guy, and if he takes hold and really starts to gain steam, he is a guy that could be a future defensive coordinator. Norton's a guy that I never really thought was someone I'd want in that position for the reasons I mentioned before. I think he's more of a motivator than a strategist, and I think that that's something you need to figure out. So the question before about second cornerback, I'm not as worried about that yet. I think the Seahawks have proved time and again they can make a lot of guys better at that position. I think they've got Chris Richard around, and I think that he's going to help guide any quarterback that joins, or cornerback that joins. I think there's also some interesting depth there. I think you've got Ty Smith. I think you got Kerry Williams. You'll have Tharold Simon at some point. Jeremy Lane hopefully will be back at some point. You've got Will Blackman, who people still don't talk about, but I think is great. Not great, but I think he's a really good person to have on the team. You know what you're going to get from him. There was a question earlier about what's my biggest concern about this year's team. It really is the simplest, and I've just harped on it, is center. I mean, I think that's a little bit of an obvious answer, but it's also the truth. I mean, if that does not pan out, then you're going to see that offense struggle. It doesn't matter if you have Jimmy Graham. It doesn't matter if you have Marshawn Lynch or Russell Wilson or Doug Baldwin or anyone else. If that line in the middle is not working and is getting collapsed by some really damn good defensive lines in the NFC West, really you're not going to score points. You're going to the whole offense can collapse by that one position. And you've also got Alvin Bailey, who's a new left guard, and so there's communication challenges you have to get used to there. And that's something you got to see. And so people harassed me because came up pretty strongly against the Jimmy Graham trade, and specifically losing Max Unger as part of that trade. This is why. I mean, I don't think that I have definitely come around on Jimmy Graham, but as far as whether I can deem that to be a really good trade, I won't be able to tell you until I see that line performing and holding up. And if that line never gels and is the reason that the Seahawks offense just tanks, then it won't have been a good decision. And I think that's something we have to wait and see. So there was another question. I'm sorry I missed it. Terry, I think you asked a question, and I might have missed it, so feel free to ask it again. Comment came in around, they played without Unger and did okay. That's true. They did okay. They also were significantly, 60% better as an offense when Unger was there than when he wasn't. They had him for both stretches when they went to the Super Bowl and the playoffs. So, I think he's super important, and the offense did struggle, both in passing and in running at times without him. Russell has to make do and he has to make the line calls without Max. We'll see if someone else can do that for him. Pass rush is an interesting one. So it definitely did disappear at times last year. I think that you get a situation where in 2013 you had Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett as rotational players that could plug and play, and their whole purpose really was to get the quarterback, and I think that was great. Now those guys are foundational starters. They're in the base package. And what you're going to see is the pass rush is going to depend largely on how the development of guys like Frank Clark, Cassius Marsh, Jordan Hill, even Ataba Rubin, as big as that boy is, how those guys come together. And I think Bruce Irvin's another wild card. I mean, he's still an underappreciated pass rusher. People had such high expectations. I did as well. Could this be a 15-sack guy with his speed? But he still has more sacks than most Seahawks in history in their first 3 years in the league. And so I'm curious to see if all those things put together make this pass rush significantly more productive than last year's. I also think guys like Kevin Pierre-Louis offer some interesting options there with his speed. If I had to bet, I think this pass rush is going to be 15 to 20% better than last year's, maybe more. Injuries always play a role, but I like the different variety and rotational options there. The other challenge that factors into the pass rush isn't just the players. Dan Quinn's gone. Dan Quinn schemed a lot of those pressure packages. He's good about which lineman to play where. This puts a lot of pressure on Travis Jones, who's the line coach, to know what to do. And it puts pressure on Chris Richard. Like, is he going to be a secondary coach that just plays a lot of zone coverage to protect the secondary, or is he going to get after the other team and be aggressive? So I really hope it's the latter. I think the team does too. I saw a question from Terry about Christine Michael, odds of him being on the 53-man roster. I don't know. I mean, under 20% I think is pretty provocative. I think he's the most talented running back on the roster outside of Lynch. As a runner, he might be more talented than Lynch. Yes, that sounds crazy, but just as a pure runner and athlete, he's got athletic skills that Marshawn doesn't even have. So I don't know. I think he's your most explosive offensive player. Until I see more of Tyler Lockett, that would be that's where I would stay, is that he's the most explosive player with the ball in his hands on the roster. I continue to challenge, Tom Cable to find a way to get him on the field. Continue to challenge Christine Michael to find a way to get on the field and to run within the system and not fight the system the whole time. If he doesn't, and he doesn't make the roster, or he doesn't make it beyond next year, it will be one of the real shames. I mean, in terms of talent versus potential versus actual productivity, it will be a big miss. And I think most of it has to lie on Christine Michael's shoulders. Part of the reason I don't think that you're going to see him cut him is that he's under club control for another year next year. So knowing that Marshawn Lynch might retire after this year, they may choose to move on from him to clear cap space. Robert Turbin is in the last year of his deal. Christine Michael is the only feature-level running back that would be on the roster and under control. So I don't know why you would cut that. And he'd have to really just prove that there's no way he will ever pan out for them not to want to see the full extent of his contract come through. So with that, folks, I think I'm going to wrap it for the day, start getting ready and packed up. I'm down here in San Francisco, and I got to head back to Seattle. And I will catch you all the next time. Thanks for joining, everybody.